migrants travel throughout the states. I remember hearing my parents talk about going to California where they pick strawberries. I never had the chance, to go after I was born. Our route was always during the summer. Um, they would take us out of school in April. Every April, the middle of April, we were taken out of school so we could um, help my parents to work out in the fields. So we picked onions, melons, watermelons was what we did. And from there, then in May, we would head down to North Dakota, to Pembina, North Dakota. I've actually worked in a couple of towns there. One was Cavalier, North Dakota, and the other one Pembina, North Dakota. And so we would stay there from May till July, for the middle of July. And then from the middle of July, we would go to Ohio. And there we would do pick tomatoes, pickles, and we would work on some soybean fields, cleaning the fields with machetes was what we would cut the weeds with. And so that was my life growing up, working out in the fields. I remember the first time I was 6 years old when I remember my first experiences, and it was picking tomatoes. So an experience. We lived in camps, so it was very, very different. And I actually designed the camp that we lived here in Illinois. It was just across the river from Muscatine in New Boston, Illinois. And so I made a design on that. And so I wanted to share, just to give you an idea of what the campus looked like. I don't know if I have enough for everyone.
We can pass it around.
But we can do that,
cool.
and then. And so this is the camp that we lived in. And so they had different living quarters, as you can see there. This section here was divided into 3 sections. It was only a wall that divided each of the sections, so you could hear everything that was going on. With the next family member, you almost had to whisper to them if you didn't want anybody else to know. And these other ones was just a 1 room. And I could say probably just 1/4 of this barn here would be one house. And all that was in there would be a refrigerator, a stove, and 1 bed. So when we went to work out in the fields, we always lived in houses where there was only 1 bed. So whoever was the youngest was the one that slept with mom and dad. The rest of us, we all slept on the floor. It didn't matter. The brothers, sisters, we all slept together, and so that's how our upbringing was. And there wasn't, as you can see here, none of the houses had sinks nor restrooms. There was only 1 outhouse. Look at all the living quarters, and only 1 outhouse for everyone. I mean, we're talking about families. In our family, we were 7 children, and then my mom and dad. So to live in one of these quarters here, the small house, we were very crowded. But that's the way we lived. And when you're raised that way, it's not hard to live. My coworker tells me, well, how did you feel? I said, well, when you're raised like that, you don't see anything. It's not difficult for you to accept any other struggles that you may have to do. We lived in house, and in that house, like I said, there was the stove, refrigerator, 1 bed. So here were the showers. So in the evening, after everybody got off work, the women would go on this side and the men would go to the other side. The entries were to the sides. and that's where people would shower. There was only one sink for the whole camp. So we took turns washing dishes, and it was mainly the young girls that would be in charge of washing the dishes. And right here where the tree is, they had built, like a little bench around it, and that's where we would wash our dishes. We would go to the sink, get our water, and then go to the tree and then start washing our dishes there. So that was the kind of, you know, like that we had. There were camps to where there was not any hot water, just cold water. So you learn to take baths, with real cold water, run in and run out. Um, those camps I hated taking a bath, a shower. I hated it because it was so cold. It was so freezing cold, and I'm like, it really does. You ever taken you turn the water and you're in the shower and it's all hits you really hard and it's cold. That's how it was. That's what the camp was like here. In this camp here in New Boston, Illinois, where we went, I went here, I think it was all together like 6 years in a row. Because we moved from Ohio, instead of taking the route to Ohio, then we started coming to Illinois. But we would always come to Muscatine. They had actually had a migrant program in Muscatine. So there were a couple, 2 or 3 ladies that would go out to the camps in Illinois and, help us. And actually that was how my sister settled in Muscatine, Iowa. Was through the migrant program. They helped them look for housing and for work, and then so they decided to stay here. And while our family, went back to Texas, but then I was sent here to stay with her, and that's how I settled here. But that is just to give you an idea of how it was, at a very young age. And like I said, in some of the camps, you didn't have any hot water. I remember my mom, killing the chickens, to eat. And it was, she would grab it and just twirl it around like that from the neck. Then I'd put it in boiling water and then, peel it all out and kill it right there. Like it. But good thing I never had to do that, but I remember my mom having to do that for us. And but that's how it was back then at the camps where we lived. And there was when we used to go to Ho Sugar Beets, and I have a book here. I'm going to show you some pictures because that's when I read the book. It's Rose of Memories, and
oh wow,
Rose of Memory.
Cool.
And by Saul Sanchez. And actually, when I started reading this book, it just brought back so many memories, and there was moments that I got very emotional because there were memories. And this is how we used to eat out in the fields, and you can look at the different. I put like where they hoeing sugar beets here.
Okay. Use a short-handled or long-handled hose?
The long. I'm glad they were the long. Even though I don't think I would have any issues.
Hilariously, we've actually already talked about that in this class. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are different ones. There's the hoeing of sugar beets, and then later down here about picking tomatoes. And that's what it was. And so when you look at the life, my mom and I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And our job was as women, were to make sure that we had lunch and breakfast ready. We had to be out in the fields by 5 o'clock. So we get up at 4 o'clock, be out in the fields by 5. And so we had our breakfast and our lunch out in the fields. And you will see that on that first picture where they're sitting down. And that's how we used to sit down and eat right there by the field. But one thing that I was remembering is my dad never sat down. He never did. he always stayed standing up. He never sat down to eat with us. He was, we were the ones that we were always sitting down, you know, because that's the only time you could sit down. The rows were a mile long. So all day you're just walking back and forth with the host. And, you know, by the time you get done at the end of the day, my, my dad never carried a watch, but he would look up at the sun and look at his shadow. And then it was when he said, okay, it's 7 o'clock, it's time to leave.
Wow.
So then we would go home. And he would always look at his shadow, you know, and that's how he told time. And so it was just those things that we learned. And so when we would go back home, and as coming from a Mexican family, you know, still make our homemade tortillas, you know. So we get back home, and my mom and I would change our blouses, wash our hands and face, and start doing preparing dinner. And then I would be in charge of the drinks and the tortillas, and then my mom would do the cooking of the actual meal. And so that's what we would do. And my dad would always make sure, you know, that he would then take care of the tools, make sure he would sharpen them, get them ready for the next day. So that was his job in the evening, and he would also help us around the house too, because he knew how tired we were. But you know, and then you still had to warm up water to take a bath, because in North Dakota we lived in a house, and it was a really nice house compared to the camp. It was a really nice house, but there was only water in the kitchen and water to wash clothes. But there was no running water in the shower. They had a tub, but in the restroom, but we were not allowed. There was no running water in that area, so we had an outhouse that we had to go to. So all that time I was, you know, we went to the camps or worked in the fields, so we always had an outhouse. We never had a restroom inside the house, you know, so that was our experience of growing that. So it really helps you as an individual. It helped me. I have a very close bond to my parents. Well, my dad passed away, but with my mom, I have a very close bond. I learned a lot about them. You know, all those hours that you work together side by side, you know, they start telling you about it. My mom and dad would talk to me about their upbringing and how their life was, you know. So there's a lot of family time that we spent together, and forms that really close bond as a family. We all always ate together, you know. It was never, you eat right now and somebody else eats later. My grandchildren are used to that, but I tell them, no, Mama says now, it's now. We're all eating together. But, and so they taught us a lot of work ethics out in the fields, about responsibility. They taught us a lot about, you know, working, you work as a team. We're a team. And that's what I always saw our family, because there was 5 of us that would work out in the fields, and we were a team, you know, all together. I knew that I had to work really hard, and when you look in the book, the tomato baskets were about this high, and there was 12 cents a basket, you know, and so you had to make a lot of baskets. And so we had to work really hard, and at the end of the day, you know, it was everybody pulling together to make as many baskets as we could as a family, and then they would pay us at the end of the week.
They just keep track of
They would
all the
count.
baskets in your family, and
Yes.
keep track of it.
They would keep track of all the families. If you see, there was a lady standing by, she was standing by the tomatoes here. She's standing by the row of baskets of tomatoes. And so they would give you a section of the field as a family. And so at the end of the day, you would run all those baskets, you would run them all to the edge of the road, because then that's when they're gonna start loading them up. And so whoever the foreman was, he would start counting baskets at the end of the day. And so he kept track of everybody, each family's baskets of how many they made per day. So that's how it was. And so I knew how important it was for me to, my work, my commitment to my parents. I tried the hardest. I always tried the hardest to make sure that I worked side by side with them. I never stayed behind. I never liked my parents to go back and help me and try to help me to come up to where everybody could keep working all together. Anytime anybody stayed behind, my parents went and helped. Either there was a hoeing sugar beets or picking tomatoes or cleaning the soybean fields, whatever it was. Anybody that stayed behind, my parents always went and helped us because they always wanted all of us to stay together on there. So you learn all those ethics. You learn to work as a team. You learn a lot about each other and the caring. And so there's a lot of things that you learn as you're growing up, a lot of responsibility at a very young age that you learn that you are part of that responsibility and outcome of the family. So, like I said, they would take us out from school in April, and then when we went back to Texas, because we would be in North Dakota during the summer, and then when we switched from Ohio to Illinois, so then we wouldn't go back to school until October. And so, we were always being taken out of school early and taken to school late, So we always had to stay in class for recesses for the first month to try to get caught up with everybody else. And so it was very hard. I was ninth grade dropout. I had completed my ninth grade, and then I was sent here to Muscatine. And the reason that I didn't want to go to school was mainly because it felt very awkward. There was only like a handful of Latinos in Muscatine. So each time I went into a store, everybody would stare at me. And I was like, why are they staring? What's wrong with me, I was like, what? And I told my sister, why do people keep staring? So it made me feel very uncomfortable. And so that's why I didn't want to go in Muscatine. So I chose not to go to school. And then later got my GED. And that's, and then I got married and then later decided to work on my associates in sociology. And that takes me into the kind of work that I am doing right now. But I do want to point out back into working out in the fields. I don't know how many of you have heard about Cesar Chavez. Okay, he was an advocate. He fought for workers' rights. And it made me realize, how true it was that sometimes, the exploitation that happens, to a lot of the workers. And I remember they used to put us, when we were on this farm, the camp, I remember there was a field right next to it, tomato field. And they would they would say, okay, everybody get on the side. So we would all stand on the side, and the field was there. And they would spray the pesticides. They would be spraying it, and the airplane would come like 2 or 3 times down and spray it. And then they just had us standing there, not too far away from the field. Not only that, they only had us waiting like half an hour, and then we had to go in and start picking tomatoes. But when you would move the branches, you would see the dust coming up, and we were breathing all that. And so when I read about Cesar Chavez, I'm like, no wonder, he fought for that, even though it still continued, because I'm talking about the 70s when we lived at the camps, and even then, it was still happening. But there was a lot that Cesar Chavez fought for the protection, for better pay. Like I said, those baskets, you were paying 12 cents a basket. So just imagine how much they were getting out of a basket. But, and we used the farmer. I don't know if any of you know about H.J. Heinz Company in Muscatine, the tomato
Like
for
ketchup?
the ketchup.
Yeah.
And so that's who we would pick tomatoes, or the farmer that we worked for. He would, the tomatoes were for H.J. Heinz, so that could make ketchup. But I just wanted to point that out because in regards to how it says that Chavez thought for people to have better living quarters. And there's another article that I brought also because this is another article of how, I don't know, did you hear anything about the Braceros program?
Yeah.
Okay, great, I'm glad.
We talked about it the last few days actually,
Okay.
and listened to some oral histories of people connected to that program.
Did you hear about this article?
Yes!
Okay.
Yes!
So you did. So you
We haven't talked about it with our class, but Mark sent it to us.
Oh, okay, okay, well, I have a copy here.
It's
for-
wonderful.
Here, I'll just pass it around and see how many. It is a great article, and it's so true. You know, and so Cesar Chavez fought for that right for people to have better living quarters, for people to have better pay, for their protection, because it did. There was a lot of issues about women that were pregnant. Because they worked out in the fields until it was time for them to have the baby, and I remember my mom doing that. And so unfortunately, because of the different pesticides that were used and people would go in, some of the children were coming out, you know, with health issues. And so it was great that he fought for that because it meant, you know, saving some of the children that were having to go through some really tough times that time of birth. So I'm glad that you have that. That's a great article. And
Just the basic thing of this article is like they tried to replace the Bracero program with like high school athletes. They were like, let's get high school athletes. Like they're tough. They're gonna be able to do this.
yes.
And it, like just most of them quit after like a couple weeks. The person who wrote
Yes.
it was one of those people. He made it the whole summer, but he was just like, you know, they were just like super wusses compared to the Braceros who are actually doing this work.
And I understand because you see, after when I worked out in the fields, I could work out there, you know, from morning till really late at night, and it was okay. But then when I got married and stayed in Muscatine, the next year when my parents came to the camp, I wanted to go out there and I wanted to help them work out in the fields. Believe me, I couldn't keep up with them at all. And no matter how hard I tried picking those tomatoes, my arms, I mean, I had lost everything. My body had gotten used to, you know, the kind of life that I was living. I wasn't active anymore. And so, yeah, I can understand that, you know, when your body's not used to having that kind of activity, then yeah, you're out in the sun and you feel like you're dying. You know, it's really hard. I can't take the humid. But when you're raised in that kind of, those kinds of environments, you're so used to everything. So a little bit of, you know, heat isn't going to kill you, you know. That's how I thought. You know, but now it is too humid. I'm staying inside. But yeah, so I wanted to bring that out. The Bracero program was actually during World War II. You know, just for the fact that, you know, a lot of the men had gone to war, and so, you know, the U.S. government opened the border, Mexican border, and started saying, come, help us out. You know, our crops, you know, we really need people to pick up the crops. And so that was, you know, from the 1940s to early 1960s when it ended. And that's why, you know, that Bracero program existed and ended, and that's why they were trying to get the A-team to get out there and pick up the crops. But, and actually that was how the flow went from then getting more immigrants into the United States was right after that Bracero program. Because before, as you remember, the border was open, people could go and come. But when they closed the border then, the immigrants started to continued to come into the United States. And I do have something else to show you about that. Sorry I'm bombarding you with all this information, but
Cool.
I felt that it was very important to look at it where the change came, and it was right after the Braceros program. Okay, and you will see where the immigrant population, as you can see, came more from the European countries, and then started to shift right after that. Are we gonna have enough? Do we have enough? Yeah. Okay. And then started the shift right after the Braceros program. As you can see, it started increasing, and that's where you can see the change here, almost in the 1960s, when the Braceros program ended. Then people started coming in, so we'll still continue to see an influx. So I ended up staying in Muscatine, and actually, I got married, and I have 4 children. They're all born in Muscatine, and then from there I worked in production, actually at H.J. Heinz for 13 years, and
It's great.
Yeah.
See all steps of the catch-up process.
Yes, I did from the very start to the end. And so, it just happened that I was going to school. I worked 3rd shift, so I was going in at 11:30 at night and getting off at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I worked in that shift for 5 years, but when I was on my 2nd year, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I didn't want to just hold boxes. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help the community. I didn't even know how, but I felt that I needed to do something more. And so that's what encouraged me to go back to school. It was a struggle for me as being a 9th grade dropout, and then just having a GED wasn't equivalent to me. It's not as a high school diploma, as when you go through all your years of high school. And so I missed a lot of that, and it was a struggle for me to go back to school, go into college, and try to do my best, and had family already. I had my children with me already. And so I would work 3rd shift, get off at 8 o'clock. I had to be in class by 8:10. So I would run out to the parking lot, get in my car, and run into the college class. And I did that, and it was a struggle. And I always tell my grandchildren, I said, in order to gain things in life, you need to, sacrifice something. And I was willing to make a sacrifice because I didn't want to stay in the same place. I wanted to do something else. I didn't know what. I didn't know what at all. And I just remember that one early morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning, as I was holding boxes, I was praying. That was my moment to pray. And I said, Lord, put me in a place where I can serve you. And that's when, that was on a Wednesday morning. On Sunday, I was offered a job. On Monday, I took in my resume. On Tuesday, I was interviewed, and Thursday, I started the job. So then from day one, I realized, this is where the Lord wants me to be. So I have always seen my job as a mission, not as a job. And I tell you, believe me, it's very stressful when you run an organization, because you need to look at the finances. I've had to put my staff on part-time, and it's very difficult, especially when you have staff that have been with you for 13 years. And they have families that they have to support. So it's a great commitment to run an organization, a nonprofit organization, and an organization where not everybody supports it. Because what? Because we help immigrants, because we help refugees, because we help people that are not born in the United States. And so, it's, even though our organization is recognized nationally by the U.S. Department of Justice. We are accredited by the U.S. Department of Justice. Myself, I have received accreditation to where, you know, the U.S. government says you have the knowledge to provide services to the public on immigration issues. And so myself and Irma Leonards, who is my colleague, have received training, and so we now are able to provide a service. And unfortunately, it's a struggle. Not very many people want to support organizations that help immigrants or refugees. And so it makes it very, very hard. But you know, we're there because it's about the people. It's not about our policies. You know, it's very important. This country should always have policies in place, you know, to do the right thing. Our job is not to tell the people you're doing wrong. No, we're here to educate you. Okay, you're in this situation right now. Let's see if you qualify for an immigration benefit. And you know, I don't know if you heard about the DACA students, you know. All these students that were brought in, you know, at a very young age, many of them were probably just months old when they were brought in. And now they have an opportunity to have a social security number, to have an employment authorization under this program, but they had to either still be in school, they have to be at least, 16 years old before 16 years old, when they entered the United States. And they had to make sure that, they're in school or they had graduated. So they had to have or be taking a GED class. So, you know, those are the things that they had to be under. So they were able to then apply for this program, and now they're able to even continue their education if they wish. But when they are just going to school and they're undocumented, they lose out on some of the programs because some of the programming in schools require a social security number, and they may not have a social security number. So, but like I mentioned, our job there at the center is to help individuals through the immigration process. So we help with, we provide consultations, we fill out immigration forms. We represent individuals before immigration offices, that with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and with the Department of State is who we deal with, the offices that we work with. And so we walk them through from the very beginning of their process till the very end. We help people become from legal permanent resident into becoming a citizen. We have refugees that come in a refugee status, become legal permanent residents, and then help them become citizens of the United States. But there's a different timelines for each thing, so it might take a long time. And that's, you know, why there might be a lot of people in the United States that are under an immigration process, but because of the timeline, they're not able to obtain a legal status. It can take a long time. For example, my parents are from Mexico. If I were to, let's just say I had a brother that was born in Mexico and I petitioned for my brother, it would take 21 years by the time a visa can be available to him. Okay, now, if you, like say, if my brother was here in the United States and he entered before December of 2000, and I put in my family petition for my brother before April 30th of 2001, he can remain here, even if he's undocumented. Under the 245I law, he can remain in the United States until a visa number is available to him. So yes, there are a lot of people who are undocumented in the United States who are under these different types of processes. But the law says you can remain until there's a number available. So, you know, out of the people that they say, oh, there's all these documents, well, a lot of them are under process, but unfortunately, they have to be in a non-documented status until there's a visa number available. Okay, but I wanted you to have that information there. At the Diversity Service Center, we also have another, two other programs. We have the Minority Senior Citizens Program, and we actually got state funds from that, from Milestones Area Agency on Aging approached us. They wanted us to do, give a meal site to seniors. They had received funding for minority senior citizens ages 60 plus. And so they had gone to different institutions and agencies, and they just couldn't get anybody to help them, so they came to us. And so we have been providing that service for them since 1997. The immigration program actually started back in '94. And I was with another agency before the Diversity Service Center of Iowa, who I work with now. And the Diversity Service Center of Iowa opened the doors back on March 1st of 2001. But I have been coordinating the programs back since the 1990s when I worked for another agency. And what happened was we outgrew the organization, and so it was spinned off and formed the Diversity Service Center. So I've been doing this field for 24 years now. But believe me, there has been times that I've wanted to quit, just of the stress. There's just so much stress in every way. But then I'm reminded as to why I'm there. I'm reminded that, it's a mission. It's a mission, and I have to carry on. But yeah, policies affect, immigration policies do affect the services that we provide, because then people have a lot of fear right now, and even though they qualify for benefits, we've seen DECA students not renew their status because of the fear of being deported. If you've heard of I don't know if you have heard about the temporary protected status. There's 10 countries that they're now eliminating their the individual status. These are individuals who have lived in the United States up to 2 decades now, 20 years in the United States. All their children have been born here. They have all their belongings here, And so for them, it's a very hard situation of saying, I'm gonna be deported. I don't even know how it is back there. As temporary protected status, some of them cannot go back home. You can't travel abroad, depending on their situation when they came into the United States. And so they don't know how back home is. And so just that there's so much fear right now about, they don't know what their future is going to be like. They don't know. It's hard. It's really hard. So maybe I should stop talking.
No, so that's wonderful background information on your life and your work. Could we open it up for some questions?
Yes, definitely, please.
Wonderful.
I have a question. What is the most challenging part of your job, just day to day?
For me, the most challenging is always the finances, because to run an organization right now, our budget it is $179,000 is the budget for our year. We're down to 3 staff now, so that's going to change for next year. But it's always the finances, trying to find funds. We receive funding through grants. We do, for the immigration service, we do charge a minimal fee. For example, for consultations, we charge $60. For a family petition, we charge, depending if it's for a spouse, we charge $500. If it's for a parent or a sibling, it's $400. So depending, because it includes translations of civil documents that we have to, birth certificates that we have to translate into English, besides filling out the forms and getting all the evidence that's requested on the packet. But that's my struggle has always been, and like I mentioned, not everybody likes immigration. It's not is that's a very hot topic, and so there's so much negativity that people do not want to support it. So it's a struggle.
Um, so, because you had some experiences that were less than pleasant in Muscatine, I'm curious as to why you decided to settle down there.
Well, because that shouldn't stop me. That shouldn't stop me. You know, I've been told to go back to Mexico. You know, I've been escorted out of a building. You know, I've gone to a bank and the teller will see me coming in and she'll put close. You know, and as soon as she sees somebody else, still waiting in line. She sees somebody else and does the eye contact and she'll remove it. You know, but I can't let that take me down. I can't. If I want things to be better, I have to be part of that process. I have to, you know, try to do things in a better way. I remember when that lady told me, go back to Mexico, and we were in McDonald's, and all we were doing, I asked my son, what would you like to eat, you know, in Spanish, you know? And the elderly lady turned around, she goes, why don't you go back to Mexico where you belong? And then my son looks up to me, and he says, Mama, what is she saying? You know, he didn't understand, he was too little. But, you know, what is she saying? Go back to Mexico, you know? But my...
So I was born in Texas.
In Florida.
Or Florida, right, raised in Texas.
But, you know, the thing is, my parents always taught us, you never speak back to your elderly. Never speak back to your elderly. So I had to take it in. I couldn't respond to her. I had to accept it and take it in because that's what I was taught. You never speak to your you speak back to your elders. And so it was very hard, yeah. Very, very hard. And so, but it wasn't until, actually I always felt like I didn't belong here because of my color. And I didn't know what it was to be, you know, when I went to Mexico, I mean, I didn't belong there because I'm not from Mexico, you know. So there's this old lady, Indian lady, they called La India Maria, and she would always say, I don't belong from there nor from here. And I always felt that way. I felt that I never belonged. I didn't feel like an American because I was always told to go back to Mexico. And I'm like, well, I can't do anything about my color. This is my color. You know, I can't, even though I'm born here in the United States, there's nothing I can do about it. But it wasn't until I heard the song, and I don't know if you have heard the song, God Bless the USA. And I realized until I heard that song, it just clicked on me. I said, you know, it's all about that opportunity. This nation gives us an opportunity to reach our goals and our dreams. It's not about where you have lived or where you're from, but having that opportunity and to honor those who have died for the freedom that we now have here in this nation. And so it wasn't until I heard that song, and I can say I'm a proud American, because now I know who I am. But it took all those years, and it took that song for me to stop and think like, yeah, that's what it's all about. It's about this nation that gives us that opportunity. We have everything handed out to us, you know, but it wasn't until then. But I strongly believe that we need to continue. I have to keep my head up high. I'm not gonna fall. I can't fall. You have to think about the people that you serve. You have to think that, hey, it takes all of us to make a community. Every single one of us. It doesn't matter what our color is. We're all humans. You know, we have more things in common than differences. Maybe just our shape of our face, the color of our hair, you know, the color of our skin. But, you know, we have more similarities than differences.
I wonder, have you seen things change in Muscatine over the time you've been there? I mean, certainly you said when you came there was just a handful of Latinos, like,
Yes,
there's certainly more now. Is it, do you feel like people are more accepted in the community?
no. I mean, a little bit, just
Yeah.
a little bit, yeah, just a little bit. Right now we have we have a Liberian population that have come in. We have a little over, I think there's more than 1,000 Liberian families there that we have in, you know, as a population of Liberians in Muscatine. We service them, you know, but there's there's so much diversity. You go into Walmart and just everybody speaking different languages, and it's people from India with their dresses, you know, people from Africa with their dresses, you know, and it's just it's really nice to see that diversity that we're now experiencing, and hopefully with that, you know, it's all about how much we get involved. And I think in us, the Latino population, there has been a lack of communication with the, you know, with the general public, and I think it's very difficult because I don't know if you know about West Liberty.
Yeah.
You know, they have the dual program for the students and all that. That's a very, of course, it's a lot smaller community, you know, 3,000 population, but still it's a community so close that, you know, they're a very welcoming community. And I think it all depends, you know, how much our local government is willing to reach out and have a relationship with all the people, with the whole population. And right now we have a good mayor, and she's very open and very inviting, you know, to all cultures. And I think that's making a difference right now, to where there's more connection.
UC West Liberty is a great example of a town that's doing really well.
West Liberty is a great example. They have been, I would say, ahead of everything in regards to the school systems, you know, in Iowa, because they, you know, when you teach a child to be bilingual, it's about having more opportunities. And you can address people of different cultures by learning those languages. I'm not saying that those two should only be the only ones. You know, definitely there should be others to consider to be more bilingual, trilingual. But you know, when you are able to cover a huge population by being bilingual.
That's great. You're doing a public service announcement for my Spanish classes for these guys.
Yes, yes. Aprendan español.
I have like a 1-year-old son who we're really hoping he'll be able to open enroll in the dual language program over there.
Mhm.
The schools are great.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you start them because they say that when you're little, their mind is like a sponge. It takes in everything, and they do. So, yeah, at a younger age, but it's never too late to learn another language.
So what does a day in your life look like?
It's a very busy day because I'm a grandma. So it all depends. I'll be taking care of grandchildren in the next 3 weeks. Yeah, in the next 3 weeks. And I have actually 2 grandchildren that live with me right now. They're adults. One of them is 17. The other one is 19. And then I have 3 that are going to be coming, which is I'm talking of age 11, 13, and 15. And so I usually get up around 5:30, get ready. If I have my young grandchildren, like this morning, last night they had to stay with me, so I make breakfast for them and that. But I try to be in the office always at least by 7:30. And the first thing that I do, it depends. If there's a week I have to work on grants, so I put my immigration paperwork aside. I'm a specialist for waivers. I have people from Marshalltown, I have people that come from Des Moines, from Ottumwa, people that come from Beerstown, Illinois, from Peru, Illinois. I mean, just the area that we cover could be from Chicago this way, from Des Moines this way, from Ottumwa this way. Is normally what we cover the area, or the Coralville area and all that. And I specialize on waivers. Waivers is anyone who entered the United States undocumented, is penalized for living in the United States undocumented for more than a year. If you've been here for more than a year and you're over the age of 18, you are penalized. And so.
What does penalized mean?
Okay, so I'll take you
Okay,
into that.
yeah.
So what happens is, okay, let's say I got married, my husband's a US citizen, I came into the United States, I've been here for over, let's say, 2 years. And since I came in illegal into the United States, I crossed the desert, whatever. So now what happens, and I'm already over the age of 18, now the immigration penalizes you for being in the United States undocumented for over a year. So now I have a 10-year penalty against me. So, and since I came into the United States undocumented, I cannot adjust status in the United States. I will have to go for my interview back to the American Embassy back home in Mexico. Okay, so, but the moment that I step out, that penalty takes place. I'm barred 10 years from the United States.
Even if you were married to a citizen here?
It doesn't matter.
Wow.
You're barred from the United States 10 years. So what I do is, there's a law right now to where it's a provisional waiver. And so if you're married to a US citizen or married to a legal permanent resident, then your spouses you can apply for a waiver saying, that to please forgive my penalty of 10 years, because if I'm not forgiven, then my spouse is gonna extremely suffer without my presence. And so I work on those cases. I prepare their packets. The packets are about this much, because it's all about evidence. You have to show evidence that yes, your spouse is going to suffer. Well, how are they going to suffer? You can't just say it in a statement. Well, you have to write a statement of how they're going to suffer, but where's the evidence to back that up? And so that's what I do. Each case can take me 35 to 40 hours, off and on, depending on how long, I can have a case with me maybe 3 months, depending on how soon they're getting their evidence to me, because it takes time. Sometimes it's hard for people to gather evidence, and so we have to figure out what they have to do next, and so there's a waiting period for that too. So then, if I'm gonna work on grants, I just focus on grants that day, but if I'm working on a case, then I work on those specific case. I do a lot of presenting. I do presenting. I go to meetings, and so I have a board of directors of the organization, and there's 4 committees. There's the promotion and publicity committee, the finance committee, the personnel committee, and then the long range committee.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's months that I'm full of meetings. So it varies, but I try to have a balance between, in the morning, focus on the finances, in the afternoon, focus on the immigration part of it. But sometimes get home, it depends, at 6 o'clock. I don't, besides my grandchildren, it's just me and my grandchildren, so, yeah.
What does evidence that they're gonna suffer look like?
The what?
Like you said, you need to present evidence that if the spouse is removed, they're going to suffer. What does that look like?
Okay, the evidence could be, it's in different, you can, maybe health, maybe, for example, we had a spouse that had a lot of health issues. And the immigrant spouse was the one that cared for them. Okay, so if that spouse has to go back home, so who's gonna take care of them? You know, if you're the one that's there to assist them, either if it's physically, if you have to move them, maybe, you know, giving them their medications. That's one example. The other one could be a financial hardship. The financial hardship could be, okay, right now your spouse can't work because they don't have authorization to work, so you're the only provider. So guess what? If your spouse is sent back home, well, you're gonna have to send the money so they can, you know. So now you're supporting 2 households.
And maybe kids.
And yes, and so the thing is, then you're gonna have to show proof of all your monthly expenses, so all your bills, all the bills have we make copies of all their bills. We show everything from car maintenance to bills to medical bills, you know, anything that we can, depending on their situation, credit cards, phone bills, car insurances, home insurances, maybe a mortgage, they have a mortgage loan. There's some that have actually child support that they have to pay. So, you know, when you argue, make an argument and say, you know, well, I can't go with my wife back home with her because I have to pay the government over here. You know, I could, if I leave on my way back, there could be an arrest waiting for, a warrant for an arrest waiting for me, which could be the fact, you know, because they're not paying. So, and a lot of these people, their child support is deducted from their payroll. So, you know, they go back home with the wife, then they're out of everything. They're, you know, delinquent on their mortgage, the rest because they left the United States and they're not paying child support. So, yeah.
Probably only have time for like maybe one more question. Anyways.
What's your favorite part of your job?
I like working with the people. I really enjoy it. I really like working with people. You know, being able to present is so important because it's about educating. I believe that lots of times people might be judgmental because they don't know. And so being out there educating helps, you know, for awareness and just gives you a different kind of a mindset of what it really is, you know. And immigration, as you can see, has been existing for years. Our ancestry came here for a reason, and I see that the people that are coming in might, you know, be even for the same reasons, just for a better life, being able to provide something better. And so I say, who am I to tell somebody you don't belong here? I'm nobody. You know, I'm just another individual trying to make a difference in life. You know what I mean?
I think that's probably the time we got. Thank you so much for coming.
All right. Thank you for having me. I do have some pamphlets of, yeah, I don't know if you had that information of the organization.
That would be great, and you know, depending on what project